Hi, I'm very proud to be here today to present on behalf of Peace Brigades International. PBI is an organization that I've known about for a few years, and I find their work unique and breathtaking. They protect human rights and environmental defenders in Latin America, Asia, and Africa who are at risk because they believe in environmental justice, threatened by state and other armed groups who want to silence their voices. Environmental defenders could be lawyers defending victims affected by mining pollution, peace communities campaigning to protect their land from indiscriminate exploitation, indigenous groups denouncing environmental damage to their sacred lands. PBI sends teams of unarmed international observers. I mean, literally, they go out in just a T-shirt with Peace Brigade written on it. It's, where was I? Yes, to accompany these brave environmental defenders and make their struggle more visible and to think twice about killing an activist. Over the last 10 years, people have become more concerned about the importance of protecting the environment, and this has led to businesses caring more about their environmental image. But very few talk about the risks faced by the people who are on the front line of this struggle, environmental defenders. On average, one environmental defender gets killed every week. Recently, PBI was informed that Mr. Garcia, a peasant farmer in Colombia, was killed because he was opposing a mining project in his region. This is not just one more isolated case, it is a global trend that is becoming very worrying. The information available is scarce. The issue is completely invisible. Many communities struggle to protect their environment because they often live in poverty in isolated rural areas, have limited access to support networks, and they are standing up against extremely powerful interest groups such as big businesses. They face serious risks, and the degradation of their environment and the natural resources they depend on is imminent. Who is the earth for? Who decides what use is made of the land? What does economic growth mean, and who benefits from the distribution of such resources? Many rural communities have their own ideas about what their land should be used for, but often they are not consulted before exploitation. PBI wants to run a campaign to protect environmental defenders and raise awareness about their situation. The campaign includes 3 different complementary strands. Firstly, an awareness-raising campaign by making this issue more visible through different channels, such as social media and online campaigning and documentary film. We can raise the political costs of big businesses devastating the environment and violating human rights. It is crucial to make this issue more visible. Secondly, PBI will lobby the British government about providing ethical advice to British companies operating in other countries. PBI will continue to make recommendations to the UN and UK government about best practice on business and human rights. Thirdly, to strengthen our protection to environmental defenders. PBI will provide unarmed protection through its field volunteers to over 100 defenders across the world. I recently had the chance to learn from the testimony of a PBI volunteer who spent 2 years in Colombia accompanying communities who oppose economic interests in their land. She told me about a community leader, Manuel Uriez, who was murdered together with his 15-year-old son because he was advocating for his community's land rights. She accompanied community members as they went to search for Manuel's body. They found it on a riverbank with vultures circling above him and a big bullet hole in the side of his head. If it hadn't been for the presence of PBI, the community wouldn't have been able to go and search for his body because it was too dangerous. And the solidarity of the PBI volunteers made them feel more enabled to go on this search mission. The fact that they were able to find and identify both bodies has meant there is now a legal investigation about their deaths. You can help PBI to support environmental defenders. Without those on the front line, there is nothing that stands between us and environmental degradation. Environmental defenders are incredibly brave and committed. But bravery is not enough. Environmental defenders need our support today. This is not a competition. This is not an X Factor judgment. It's a plea for your consideration and for your help. Thank you. Is that quick enough?
That was brilliant, and within the time, fantastic.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we can have more time for questions.
Yes.
If there are questions. The question over there, the mic just going over there.
I'll need help.
Help, 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 Zoe.
Hi, I saw a poster the other day of a lady who's been put in prison for campaigning against drilling in the Arctic, which I think was from Greenpeace. Can you just explain where your charity crosses over with other charities that do a similar thing and how you work with them?
Thanks. Well, I think it's very interesting the fact that you raised the issue of the campaign that Greenpeace has been doing recently. I mean, we probably all have followed, what happens with the 30 Arctic crew, and we've been seeing the videos, and it's been really important to feel very, very connected and close to what was happening to each of those individuals that were behind bars. PBI is a smaller organization than Greenpeace. We don't have such a profile as them. We don't have the same resources. But nevertheless, we have a presence in the field. We have volunteers who are spending a year of their lives on a voluntary basis only to accompany and to have a presence beside some of these environmental defenders whose lives are at risk. We, of course, don't work in isolation, because when you are small and have a low profile, I mean, that is impossible. So we do tend to work through networks. In the case of this particular campaign, we are working very closely with Global Witness on this issue, because they also are very, very concerned, but also with other networks such as CORE, which is a network of organizations working on issues of corporate responsibility. So basically, the idea is not to work in isolation, but the truth is that because we are on the ground and we have the volunteers working by the side of these environmental defenders, we have access to very confidential information, and often information that is not known by other people in the international community. I don't know if that responds to your question.
How much are you looking to raise, and what will the money do?
Okay. Well, obviously for this particular project, we were asking for around £6,000, but as you can imagine, this campaign is a little bit more expensive than that. We are hoping, we could run this campaign on a minimum budget of £15,000, or a sort of more aspirational one of around £30,000. Obviously, we are used to run on very low resources, so of course you could do a campaign of this sort, at a much higher level. However, because we are hoping to tap into, the expertise and the networks of other organizations, and this is something that PBI does really well, that's why we believe that it is possible for us to run this campaign with very few resources.
The T-shirts cost a lot of money.
Thanks very much for the presentation. That was really interesting. I was just hoping you could say a bit more, because I'm hearing about people who are courageously defending and working for the people around them and the environment around them, and they're clearly at risk, because you've given a couple of examples of people being killed. By what magic can some volunteers dressed in a T-shirt actually help that and support that and help to keep those people alive?
Great. Well, there isn't really magic behind that. It's a whole sort of international advocacy strategy that we have developed, which is quite sophisticated. So it involves having a physical presence of volunteers on the ground, these teams of volunteers that I mentioned, that they are constantly speaking to defenders and accompanying them into different sort of trips and emergency situations. But then they also have a lot of dealings and interlocution with the embassies on the ground, with the UN, and with the local authorities, at national and regional levels as well, military and civilians. So the volunteers, besides wearing their t-shirts, they also wear their suits. They go to embassy sort of gatherings and all sorts of things. Whatever is needed and asked of them, they would do it, in order to represent and to sort of support the defenders that we are intending to protect. But then PBI has a network of organizations or sections in different parts of the world. I run the UK section, and from here we do a lot of work with the UK government, and this is going to be part of the campaign. We would engage with the Human Rights Department of the Foreign Office, specifically with the Business and Human Rights section, and we have already very good contacts there. We also have members of our sort of Alliance for Lawyers at Risk, which is a network of high-profile and very committed lawyers that support our work. Some of them are part of the Foreign Secretary Advisory Committee on Human Rights. So the idea is that you have the volunteers on the ground, but then there is a lot of work behind the scenes. It's called, third track diplomacy, or whatever you want to call it to make it look a bit nicer. But the whole point behind is that the volunteers are just the physical representation and embodiment of the consent of the international community. But behind that, there is a whole sort of international safety net that needs to be built in order to ensure that these volunteers are safe, and also they can protect the activists that they are accompanying.
I actually saw volunteers of PBI in Guatemala last week, and it's an amazing story. But I wanted to ask you, which countries are you going to work in with the money you raised today, and whose behavior are you going to try to change? International companies, the local governments, the UN, who?
Mm-hmm. PBI has a presence in different countries in Latin America, in Asia, and in Africa. I mean, as I said before, we are a small organization, but we have projects in Colombia, Mexico, Guatemala, and Honduras, and then recently in Kenya, Indonesia, and Nepal. So the idea of this campaign is to really look for trends in repression, for patterns of intimidation that are happening in different countries, the countries primarily where PBI has a presence. But in the same way that I was saying before, that we are going to be working with Global Witness and other partners, I mean, they obviously have a much global reach than PBI has, and this is precisely the beauty of working with them, because we want to show that trend is not, as Zoe was saying, they are not isolated cases. The fact that we don't have figures to show you here, only that one environmental defender is killed per week. It was from a report that Global Witness produced, because there is such a lack of information that is probably much more than that. They said that there were like 700 killings of defenders over a period of 12 years. So it's going to be a global thing. In terms of who are we going to be influencing, we will focus primarily in the UK, because we have to be ambitious, but at the same time realistic, and is where we have our connections. So we will, as I mentioned before, we will engage very thoroughly, with the UK government, but also with members of parliament, like Baroness Helena Kennedy, who has been a great supporter of us in the past when lawyers at risk have been under threat, and we have needed, parliamentarians to raise a question and to kind of say the government, please do something about their protection. So it's influencing the government, because we believe that the government needs to take a preventative policy. They should be advising businesses in ways that could be respectful of human rights and environmental justice. And this is a very important moment, because the UK government has just launched in September of this year their action plan on business and human rights. We've been advising the government and many other organizations, and they are open to listen, and the plan will be revised in 2015. So there is a window here that we don't want to miss, and we believe this campaign would help us to sort of address that.
Thank you very much. I'd just like to say a huge thank you to our main presenters, to Sandy, to Zoe, and to Corinda. None of these charities have an annual income of over £400,000 a year. And it is incredibly difficult when you're that size to reach out to people for funds, to do the funding applications, to do all of that. And so if any of you came because you were attracted by the presenters, that's fine. I'm sure they'll hang around for a drink as well. But thank you so much for those presentations. We'll now have a break for 15 minutes, and then come back and hear from 2 more charities before the pledging session. Thank you very much.